They say blood is thicker than water, but that afternoon, blood felt like poison. I stood in the corner of my mother's living room, watching my Aunt Diane lean over my mom's wheelchair like a vulture circling its prey. It was Mom's 80th birthday. The room was filled with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, but all I could smell was Diane's greed. She held a thick stack of legal papers in one hand and a gold pen in the other, whispering lies into my mother's ear. The same mother she'd spent the last 3 weeks mocking behind her back. "Just sign here, B," she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Since you can't remember where you put the house deed anyway, let me handle the burden for you." I looked at my Uncle Benjamin, his face pale with confusion, and then I looked at my mother. She looked so small, so vacant, but I knew the truth. My hand tightened around the phone in my pocket, recording every second of this betrayal. I couldn't wait a moment longer. I stepped forward, my voice steady as I said the words that shattered the room. "Mom, stop faking it. We've seen enough." But the look on my mother's face as she finally looked up, that was the part no one was prepared for. To understand why I stood there in the middle of a crowded living room and told my own mother to stop faking her dementia, you have to understand the 3 weeks of hell we put ourselves through. It wasn't a game to us. It was a survival tactic. It all started on a rainy Tuesday morning, 21 days before the party. I had stopped by Mom's house early to drop off some groceries, and I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her hands shaking as she held a tea towel. She wasn't confused. She was terrified. She told me that Aunt Diane had been coming over while I was at work, checking in on her. But Diane wasn't there to help. She was there to inventory the house. She had been walking through the rooms, pointing at Mom's antique silver and her hand-carved mahogany dresser, telling her, "You won't need this where you're going, B. You won't even remember what a dresser is in 6 months." My blood boiled. My mother, Beatrice, a woman who spent 40 years teaching 3rd grade, a woman who could still recite Robert Frost poems from memory, was being buried alive by her own sister. Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "She thinks I'm already gone, honey. She thinks my mind has checked out just because I forgot where I put my reading glasses once during her last visit. She's already talking to realtors about selling my home." That was the moment the plan was born. It was Mom's idea. She looked at me with a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen since Dad passed away and said, "If she wants a sister who's lost her marbles, I'll give her one. Let's see who Diane really is when she thinks no one is looking." For the next 21 days, we played the most painful game of theater I've ever been a part of. I had to sit there and watch my mother blank out during Sunday dinners. I had to watch her pretend to forget my name, while Diane smirked from across the table. It was gut-wrenching. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Diane by the shoulders and tell her to get out of our lives. But Mom would always give my hand a tiny, secret squeeze under the table. It was her way of saying, "Stay strong. We're almost there." But as the days crawled toward her 80th birthday, Diane's behavior shifted from greedy to downright cruel. She wasn't just waiting for Mom to fade away anymore. She was actively trying to push her out the door. She started telling the rest of the family, our neighbors, our friends, that Mom was dangerous and unstable. She was setting the stage for a forced move to a state-run facility, all while she planned to move herself into Mom's beautiful Victorian house. I spent every night looking at the recordings on my phone, watching Diane treat my mother like a piece of old furniture. It was a heavy burden to carry, knowing the truth while the world looked at us with pity. But I knew the birthday party would be Diane's grand finale. She thought it was her coronation. She thought she was finally going to get the keys to the kingdom. What she didn't realize was that every time she whispered an insult, every time she rolled her eyes when Mom forgot a word, we were adding another brick to the wall that was about to fall on her. And trust me, the weight of it was going to be more than she could handle. Before we get to the party where everything exploded, if you believe that no one should ever take advantage of a vulnerable mother, please take a second to subscribe to Prime Karma Stories. It really helps us keep sharing these lessons of justice. Now let's get back to the afternoon the vulture finally landed. But as the guests began to arrive for the 80th birthday, I noticed Diane carrying a very specific leather folder under her arm, and my heart skipped a beat. She wasn't just there for the cake, she was there for the signature. The living room was a sea of floral arrangements and expensive catering trays, but the air felt heavy, like the moments right before a summer storm breaks. Everyone was there. Neighbors we'd known for decades, old teaching colleagues of Mom's, And of course, my Uncle Benjamin. Benjamin was in the kitchen, fussing over the punch bowl. He's a good man, the kind of husband who still holds the car door open for Diane after 30 years of marriage. It made my stomach churn to see him so happy, so oblivious. He truly believed we were all there to celebrate the woman who had been like a sister to him. He had no idea that the woman he shared a bed with was currently in the hallway, sharpening her claws. That's when Diane walked in with her best friend, Cynthia. Cynthia is the kind of woman who thrives on other people's misfortunes, a professional gossiper who wears too much gold jewelry and always smells like cheap white wine. They didn't even head for the guest of honor. They headed straight for the corner where my mother was sitting, playing her role to perfection. Mom looked like a ghost of herself. She was staring at a bowl of mints on the coffee table as if she'd never seen one before. Her hair was perfectly curled, and she was wearing her favorite blue dress, but she kept her gaze fixed and vacant. I was standing by the bookshelf, my heart hammering against my ribs, holding my phone like it was a shield. Diane didn't even lower her voice. She leaned over Mom, waving a hand in front of her face. "See?" Diane snickered, turning to Cynthia. "The lights are on, but nobody's home. It's actually a blessing, really. She won't feel a thing when we move her into that place on 4th Street. It's a dump. But hey, save the money for someone who can actually appreciate it, right?" Cynthia let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "You're a saint, Diane. Truly. Taking on all this responsibility." "It's a burden, but someone has to do it," Diane replied. Then, right there in front of a room full of people, Diane reached down and grabbed Mom's vintage leather handbag that was resting on her lap. She zipped it open with a loud scritch that sounded like a gunshot to me. She pulled out Mom's wallet, fumbling through the slots until she found a small stack of cash. I watched through my camera lens as Diane's fingers pinched 2 $50 bills. She didn't even hesitate. She tucked the money right into her own neckline, patting her chest with a smirk. "She keeps losing track of her mad money anyway," Diane whispered to Cynthia, loud enough for me to hear every syllable. "She'll just think she misplaced it. Better it goes toward my stress management fund than being flushed down the toilet by a woman who doesn't even know what day it is." My hand was shaking so hard I had to lean against the wall. I looked at Mom. Her eyes didn't move, but I saw her jaw tighten just a fraction of an inch. She had heard it all. The theft, the insults, the plan to dump her in a low-rent facility just to pocket the difference. Diane turned back to the room, her face suddenly twisting into a mask of fake concern as Uncle Benjamin walked over. "Oh, Ben, it's just so heartbreaking," she sighed, dabbing at a dry eye. "She doesn't even recognize me today." Benjamin put a hand on Diane's shoulder, looking down at Mom with such pure, honest sorrow that I almost broke the plan right then and there. But I knew we needed more. I knew Diane was waiting for the perfect moment to pull out that leather folder. Before we get to the moment where Diane tries to steal my mother's entire life with a single signature, I want to ask you something. If you've ever had to stand up for a parent when no one else would, share your story in the comments. We're a community here at Prime Karma Stories, and your strength inspires us. Now let's see just how far this vulture was willing to fly. As the cake was brought out, the room went quiet, and Diane reached into her bag. She didn't pull out a birthday card. She pulled out the document. This was it, the point of no return. The room went quiet as the last echoes of happy birthday faded away. The candles on the cake were still smoking, their thin trails of gray drifting toward the ceiling. But Diane didn't care about the celebration. She didn't want a piece of cake. She wanted a piece of the estate. While the neighbors were still clapping, she reached down and pulled that heavy black leather folder onto the mahogany table, pushing the birthday cards aside like they were trash. "Everyone, if I could just have a moment of your time," Diane announced, her voice projected with that fake, practiced authority. She looked around the room, making eye contact with the neighbors, her face twisted into a mask of weary sacrifice. "As you all know, our sweet bee hasn't been herself. It's been a heavy cross to bear, watching her mind slip away like sand through an hourglass." I saw Uncle Benjamin shift uncomfortably. He looked at the folder, then at Mom, his brow furrowed. "Diane, honey, is this really the time? It's her birthday." Diane's eyes flashed, a quick, sharp warning that only a husband of 30 years could truly translate. "Benjamin, I am trying to protect her. If we don't get these medical directives sorted today, who knows if she'll even be able to hold a pen tomorrow? Do you want her left with nothing? Do you want the state to take everything she worked for?" Benjamin went silent, retreating into himself the way he always did when Diane raised her voice. The guests began to whisper. I could hear the pity in their voices, the way they looked at my mother like she was already a ghost. Diane turned back to Mom. She clicked a gold ballpoint pen, the one she used for important business, and leaned so close to Mom's ear that their hair touched. "Okay, B, look at the paper, right here on the X. It's just a little signature to make sure you're taken care of. For the doctors, remember?" I stepped closer, my heart thumping so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. I looked at the document. It wasn't a medical directive. It was a transfer of property. It was the deed to the house and the authorization to liquidize Mom's retirement accounts. Diane was trying to rob her sister blind in front of a dozen witnesses, banking on the fact that everyone believed the lie she'd spent weeks spreading. "Sign it, B," Diane whispered, her voice losing its sweetness and turning jagged. She actually grabbed my mother's hand, the hand that had taught me how to tie my shoes, and tried to force Mom's fingers around that gold pen. Diane began to guide Mom's hand toward the bottom of the page, her face flushed with a terrifying kind of triumph. I looked at Mom. Her eyes were still fixed on that bowl of mints, but I saw the signal. The smallest, almost imperceptible nod. The air in the room felt like it had been sucked out. Everyone was leaning in, watching what they thought was a tragic necessity. Diane's grin was widening, the pen inches from the paper, her dream of the Victorian house finally within reach. That was when I realized I couldn't breathe. My thumb hovered over the stop button on my recording, but I knew I had to speak first. But as Diane's grip tightened on Mom's wrist, something shifted. The vacant look in my mother's eyes didn't just fade. It burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp fire that made Diane freeze mid-motion. The silence in that room was so heavy it felt like it was crushing my chest. I saw Diane's knuckles turning white as she squeezed Mom's hand, trying to force that pen onto the paper. The neighbors held their breath, some of them even looking away, unable to watch what they thought was the final spark of Beatrice's dignity being extinguished. I couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. I stepped into the center of the room, my voice cutting through the quiet like a shard of glass. "Mom," I said, my heart pounding in my ears. "Stop faking it, we've got enough." The room gasped. Uncle Benjamin dropped the cake server he was holding, and Diane froze, her head snapping toward me with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "What are you talking about, you ungrateful girl?" she hissed. "She's sick. She doesn't know—" But Diane didn't get to finish, because at that exact moment, my mother let out a long, weary sigh and simply let go of the pen. It clattered onto the table, rolling across the deed to her house. The vacant, glassy stare Mom had wore for 3 weeks didn't just fade. It vanished. She sat up straight in that wheelchair, her shoulders squaring, her eyes turning into 2 cold flints of blue fire. She looked Diane dead in the eye, and for the first time in 21 days, she spoke. "Take your hands off me, Diane," Mom said. Her voice wasn't weak. It was the voice of the school teacher who had commanded respect for 40 years. Diane jumped back as if she'd been burned, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. "B, you're okay?" "I'm better than okay," Mom said, standing up from the chair with a steady grace that made the whole room shiver. She picked up the black folder and turned it toward the guests. My sister thought I was a senile old woman she could rob in broad daylight. She spent 3 weeks mocking my memory loss, while she picked through my life like a scavenger. Mom looked at her husband, Uncle Benjamin, whose jaw was hanging open. "Benjamin, I'm so sorry you had to see this, but your wife didn't just try to steal my house today. She's been stealing from my purse, mocking me to her friends, and planning to dump me in a warehouse for the elderly while she moved into my bedroom." Mom reached into Diane's neckline, pulled out the 2 $50 bills Diane had stolen earlier, and held them up for everyone to see. "Is this what you meant by stress management, Diane?" The room exploded into whispers of shock. Diane tried to stammer out a lie, her eyes darting toward the door, but Mom wasn't finished. She looked at the document Diane had tried to force her to sign and ripped it in half, the sound of the tearing paper echoing like a gunshot. Before we get to the final blow that sent Diane running from this house forever, I have to ask, do you think Diane deserves a second chance, or should she be cut off for good? Tell me in the comments. And if you're enjoying this victory for Mom, make sure to subscribe to Prime Karma Stories. Now, Let's see the look on Diane's face when the test results finally came in. But as Diane tried to push past the neighbors to escape, she realized the front door wasn't just closed. It was being held by someone she never expected to see. The front door didn't just open. It was held wide by our family lawyer, who had been sitting in the back as a guest the whole time. Diane's face went from sickly pale to ghostly white. My mother didn't scream or throw a scene. She didn't have to. She simply looked at her sister with a quiet, devastating pity. "Benjamin!" Diane cried out, reaching for her husband's arm. But Uncle Benjamin stepped back, his eyes filled with a cold disgust that I knew would haunt her until her dying day. He didn't say a word. He just handed Diane her coat and pointed toward the driveway. The man she had lied to for 30 years was finally awake. Diane was escorted out under the silent, judging glares of everyone she had tried to manipulate. The saintly sister was gone, replaced by a desperate thief. That night, Mom and I sat on the porch in the quiet. She squeezed my hand, a real warm squeeze this time. "Honey," she said, "you can hide a lot of things in this life, but you can never hide from yourself." Justice was served. Diane lost her family, her husband's respect, and her pride, all on the day she thought she'd won it all.